So I will start reading his poems in English, my translation, and then he will read them in Arabic. And I guess I won't say much more than that, just for the space of time. The dead in the garden. Don't open the window. Don't wake up. I beg you, don't wake up. They were dancing on the garden grass as if they were the garden's motive or its meditation, and they were screaming there. Beneath the light, their dust was coming apart. It had rained at night, all night.
Good evening. الموتى في الحديقة. لا تفتح الشباك. لا تستيقظي. أرجوك لا تستيقظي. كانوا على عشب الحديقة يرقصون كأنهم سبب الحديقة أو تأملها، وكانوا يصرخون هناك تحت الضوء. كان غبارهم ينحل. كانت أمطرت في الليل طول الليل.
Black horses. The enemy's dead think mercilessly of me in their eternal sleep, while ghosts take to the stairs and house corners, the ghosts that I picked off the road and gathered like necklaces from others' necks and sins. Sin goes to the neck. There I raise my ghosts, feed them, and they swim like black horses in my sleep. With the energy of a dead person, the last blues song rises while I think of jealousy. The door is a slit open and breath enters through the cracks, the river's respiration, the drunks and the woman who wakes to her past in the public garden. And when I fall asleep, I find a horse grazing grass. Whenever I fall asleep, a horse comes to graze my dreams. On my desk in Ramallah, there are unfinished letters and photos of old friends, a poetry manuscript of a young man from Gaza, a sand hourglass, and poem beginnings that flap like wings in my head. I want to memorize you like that song in elementary school, the one I carry whole, without errors, with my lisp and tilted head and dissonance. The little feet that stomp the concrete ground with fervor, the open hands that bang on desks, all died in war, my friends and classmates, and their little feet, their excited hands remained stomping the classroom floors, the dining tables and sidewalks, the backs and shoulders of pedestrians. Wherever I go, I hear them, I see them.
خيول سوداء. قتل الأعداء يفكرون بي في نومتهم الأبدية دون رأفة. بينما تصعد الأشباح سلالم البيت ومنحنياته، الأشباح التي التقطتها من الطرقات وجمعتها مثل قلائد من أعناق الآخرين وخطاياهم. تذهب الخطيئة إلى العنق، وهناك أربي أشباحي وأطعمها. الأشباح التي تسبح مثل خيول سوداء في مناماتي. بهمة ميت تنهض أغنية البلوز الأخيرة، وأنا أفكر بالغيرة. الباب موارب والتنفس يدخل من الشقوق، تنفس النهر والسكارى والمرأة التي تصيح في الحديقة العامة على ماضيها. وحين أغفو أجد حصانا يرعى العشب، كلما غفوت يأتي حصان ليرعى أحلامي. على طاولتي في رام الله رسائل ناقصة وصور لأصدقاء قدامى، مخطوطة لشاعر شاب من غزة، ساعة رمل ومطالع تخفق في رأسي مثل الأجنحة. أريد أن أحفظك مثل تلك الأغنية في الصف الابتدائي، تلك التي أحملها كاملة دون أخطاء، اللثغة والرأس المائل والنشاز، الأقدام الصغيرة التي تطرق أرضية الإسمنت بحماس، والأيدي المفتوحة التي تطرق المقاعد. ماتوا جميعا في الحرب أصدقائي وأولاد صفي، وبقيت أقدامهم الصغيرة وأيديهم المتحمسة تطرق أرضيات الغرف والموائد وأرصفة الشوارع وظهور المارة وأكتافهم، وأنا ذهبت أسمعها وأراها.
Friends,
موجة معي. اوكي. وين موجة معي بالانجليزي؟ لا وينها بالانجليزي بقراها؟ لا ما فيني شيء.
اوكي اذا نروح على الكلمات
على ايه؟ نصيب. اوكي وبعدين بدك تلقاها. Another horse's poem. The birds are protesting. The horse's hymn. Okay. The bird's hymn. We'll just. They don't believe me. The horses that have stirred the dust in the valleys calm. The horses that gallop split aside rows of date palms. The horses that drag the east by the scruff of the sand. The horses in mirrors and hair guarded by shadows. The horses that cross the horizon are etched on a crescent. The horses that released our kin from the garments of smoke, then tossed their turbans in time, did not wait for us to say, the horses, the horses, the horses.
ترنيمة الخيول. الخيول التي عفرت هدأة السهل، الخيول التي انشق عن عدوها الرمل، الخيول التي تسحب الشرق من ياقة النخل، الخيول التي في المرايا وفي الشعر محروسة في الظلال، الخيول التي تعبر الأفق منقوشة في الهلال، الخيول التي أطلقت أهلنا في ثياب الدخان وألقت عمائمهم في الزمان وما انتظرت أن نقول الخيول الخيول الخيول.
Okay, and this is last poem. For some of you who heard the session earlier in the morning, four sisters from Zakaria, which is the place where Ghassan and his family come from in Palestine. Four sisters climb the mountain alone in black clothes. Four sisters sigh in front of the grove. Four sisters in the dark reading soaked letters. There was a train behind the photo passing from Artuf. There was a horse carrying a girl from Zakaria, whinnying in the slope behind the plains. And the clouds were slowly passing through the canyon. Four sisters from Zakaria by the hill, alone in black clothes.
أربع أخوات من زكريا. أربع أخوات يتسلقن الجبل وحيدات بثياب سود. أربع أخوات يتنهدن أمام الحرش. أربع أخوات في العتمة يقرأن بريدا مبتل. كان قطار يعبر خلف الصورة من عرتوف. كان حصان يحمل بنتا من زكريا يصهل في المنحدر وراء السهل. كان الغيم يمر بطيئا في الأخدود. أربع أخوات من زكريا عند التل وحيدات بثياب سود. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ghassan and Fady. Friends, I don't need to say what a privilege it is to be able to hear poetry from Palestine. I just wanted to add two things. One, that the poems that Fady read of Ghassan's have been translated by him, and that the two of them, Fady is a Palestinian who lives in the US and has lived there all of his life, and Ghassan is a poet who returned to Palestine at the age of 40 and now lives in Ramallah. So when you hear their poetry, you will hear the two kinds of exile, if you like, the internal and the external, although it may not always be called that, in their poetry. And it is a very wonderful thing that we are able to hear them here, because of course South Asia has a very old historical link with Palestine, not just historical, but the link of a shared colonial experience as well. And yet we don't know too much about the literature of the region. So it's very, very wonderful that the festival has made it a point to be able to present this. The way we're going to conduct the afternoon is that I will now ask Arvind Krishna Mehrotra to read from his poetry. But one of the unusual things about this session is that the poets are also translators of poetry, and that's not such a common event. Arvind has translated the poetry, the mystical poetry of Kabir, who, as some of you might know, was inspired by the Bhakti and the Sufi tradition. But I'm not sure whether Arvind will read from his translations today. He'll certainly read from his own poetry, after which Fady will read his poetry, And then we will have Kamal Sahib reading his. If there's a little time, we might ask Ghassan to read some more or open it up. It's up to all of you. Thank you.
Well, I'll read for about 10, 12 minutes. And what I'll do is I'll read some poems from my book, from my collected poems, and then I'll read some more recent poems. Though even the poems and the collected poems, a lot of them are recent. But I won't start with a recent poem. I'll start with a poem written many years ago. It was actually written in 1971. And in 1971, I was in Iowa City, where he was also there, Ghassan was also there at the International Writing Program. And it's a poem about Allahabad, where I live. It's a poem in 3 short sections. I will not read out this, and I will not give the numbers of the sections. I'll just go from one to the other. This is about green, miraculous trees and old clocks on stone towers and playgrounds full of light and dark blue uniforms. At 8, I'm a Boy Scout and make a tent by stretching a bed sheet over parallel bars and a fire by burning rose bushes. I know half a dozen knots and drink tea out of enamel mugs. I wear khaki drill shorts, note down the number plates of cars, make a perfect about turn for the first time. In September, I collect my cousin's books and find out the dates of the 6 Mughals to secretly write the history of India. I see Napoleon crossing the Alps on a white horse. My first watch is a fat and silver Omega grandfather won in a race 59 years ago. It never works, and I have to push its hands every few minutes to get a clearer picture of time. Somewhere I've kept my autograph book, the tincture of iodine in homeopathy bottles, bright postcards he sent from Badems, Germany. At 7:30, we are sent home from the Cosmopolitan Club. My father says, no bid. My mother forgets her hand in a deck of cards. I sit on the railing till midnight above a worn sign that advertises a dentist. I go to sleep after I hear him snoring like the school bell. I'm standing alone in a back alley, and a face I can never recollect is removing the hubcaps of our Ford coupe. The first words I mumble are the names of roads, Thornhill, Hastings, Lytton. We live in a small cottage. I grow up on a guava tree, wondering where the servants vanish after dinner, at the magic of the bearded tailor who can change the shape of my ancestors. I bend down from the swaying bridge and pick up the river that once tried to drown me. The dance of the torn skin is for much later. This was a poem about my childhood, really, about growing up in Allahabad. Was I audible at the back? Was I reading too fast or too slow? Or oh, it's okay, great. This next poem, now just sort of sound checking as it were. The next poem is called A Hindu Panegyrist Remembers Sultan Mahmud, and it takes place in Ghazna 1030. Of course, Sultan Mahmud is one of the most reviled figures in Indian history because he made, I think, 30 raids into India, and he carried the treasures of Somnath back to Ghazna. But it's a kind of figure I greatly admire, and I greatly admire him for the city he built. He basically transformed Ghazna into one of the great cities of the world. And he also, and like all poets, the poets sing about their rulers, and so is this Hindu poet remembering Sultan Mahmud after Sultan Mahmud's death. The wasting disease was bad enough. Then he started losing his mind. I'll read these lines again, but one thing I wanted to point out that I was reading Professor Irfan Habib's father's book on Mahmud Ghazni. And there he says that when Ghazni was dying, he wanted to see his treasury. And then he walked past the treasury and the loot of India, he just saw it. And there were tears in his eyes because he knew that he was dying and he had to give this whole wretched thing up and go to wherever he was going. So that I think that's very sort of, it's a very moving moment of a great man losing all his wealth. The wasting disease was bad enough. Then he started losing his mind. Visiting the treasury the week he died, his jewels on display, he broke down and wept like a child. Newcomers won't believe it, but Ghazna used to be a miserable little place, known only for the sweetness of its melons, before he changed its face, gave it a skyline to match Baghdad's. He also changed our lives. Each year before the onset of winter, he'd set off on his Indian campaign, and 4 months later, when he returned in the spring, the camel trains carrying the spoils of war took a day and a night to go past my door. We sang his praises. He didn't stint on the reward, gold mostly, but sometimes a string of pearls or a silk robe like the one I'm wearing. So the Hindu panegyrist was also rewarded with a silk robe, and so he remembers the great man from the robe he was given. There are a few poems I'm going to read, 3 or 4, about things that we see every day in South Asia, in India particularly, I suppose over here as well, where you find people, men or women, ironing clothes by the side of a road. You know, they put up a little table and they're ironing clothes all day. So this is called Ironing Lady. Common everyday clothes tied loosely in a bundle. From it, the ironing lady pulls out a kerchief and glides the iron, its coals aglow along the edges, making the creased valleys disappear under her hand. Her shirt's next. She begins with the sleeves, then comes to the craggy collar, then to the planes of the front and back, slowing down as she nears the plastic buttons and the wilderness between them. A pair of blue jeans is uphill all the way. The iron hisses and gets breathless as she goes back and forth over the denim, occasionally wetting it with a damp rag. In a corner of the table, the ironed clothes pile up, each fold a stanza break, till she's folded the last one, finishing the manuscript. This other poem is called, in Allahabad and also in Delhi, you have this strange profession of the ear cleaning man. Does anyone know the ear cleaning man? Everyone knows what the ear cleaning. I didn't know what to call this person. And then I sort of YouTubed ear cleaning man. And sure enough, there is a YouTube of this ear cleaning man going about his job. Now, this is about the ear cleaning man. Unlike the carder and the caner. Now, the carder is, we still have them in India, what we call the dunya, who sort of cards cotton. Unlike the carder and the caner, the ear cleaning man has no street cry. To find him, you only have to look and he'll be there, sitting beside you on upright crate or low wall, probing your waxy ear, first one, then the other, for you to hear your inner voice the better with. Before vanishing as suddenly as he'd appeared, the hands free, a small bag tucked under his arm, and 2 needles in his headband like a pair of feelers. And, well, a couple of, another profession that I'm talking about is the roadside shrine. And this is what we call the cobbler, and the Americans would call a shoemaker. But we can't call a cobbler a shoemaker. So, but I don't use the word cobbler or shoemaker, but you'll get what I'm talking about. The word, it ends with a soul, but soul over here is spelled S-O-L-E and not S-O-U-L, because I'm talking about the mochi, basically. Roadside shrine. Before the padlocked businesses open for the day, he sets up his shrine to footwear. Awl, rasp, hammer, tin of nails, nippers, cobbler's wax, thread, scissors, scraps of leather, bottle of glue. In the center, a cast iron anvil, a headless god with two glib tongues, the longer one sticking out, waiting for the day's first worshipper to bring an offering of torn upper, worn heel, or flapping sole. And now just two more poems, and these are my poems are all about Allahabad, or they are all about Dehradun, which are the two cities in which I live. So these are two poems about Dehradun. This is called Implements, and it's about a dead cat that I discovered in the garden. And one day I got up in the morning and I was walking out, and there on the shingles I found this dead animal. It's called Implements. On the shingles, the same color as its fur, a cat's cutout. Shoveled off the ground and tossed into an empty cement bag, it is carried to a corner of the garden and there left on a mound of trash. 3 kilos of dead cat, its head an unsightly red, is in that bag that looks like any other, as does the shovel after the blood's been hosed off it, and it stands in the garden shed next to a rake. Well, this is the last poem, and it's about my mother. And she's 90 years old. And one day I was told by the maidservant that she's ordered some new bras. So I was just sort of a little confused why my mother at 90 should be. But my mother, when she gets up in the morning, like a good Punjabi lady, what she does is she takes a good look at herself in the mirror. And that morning, I don't think my mother liked what she saw. So she never wore those bras, and I keep discovering them in her cupboard. So this is a poem. It's called My Mother's New Bras. The old pomegranate, storm hit, propped up with sticks, sends out a green shoot that goes straight and up from the root, but brings no hope for the stricken tree. It's the same for my 90-year-old mother. Broken-boned, assisted out of bed, she goes to the mirrored cupboard, straightens her back, and takes a long look at herself. Secretly, she once sent for some cotton bras that turned out to be a few sizes too big and were later found among her urinous clothes, unworn, stiff in their original folds. Thanks.
Follow your heart. Schoolgirl. The love rose in my heart has wilted. The love bug. The news on the transistor. A nice man with a ponytail says, "It's understandable if you wanted to leave here for there." They were burying the evidence structurally. Boys in prison cells, and outside the kids play stretcher. One of them was dying between my hands. You think commands, injections, things to make the time pass as hope or action. She used to chase love bugs after school, to make them alight on her. She wanted not to have walked with naked men chained to a tank. In the houses she entered, a lemon, an olive, an apricot. Hands. And this is for the birds earlier. If not the swallows in the morning, then the smell of guano at night permeating her room, emanating from the bridge where protesters ignite visuals the homeless don't mind. She no more believes the devil each time it appears that it wants her. No more a girl in line for rationed bread, admonished by women who say the soldiers have commenced the rapes. The soldiers knocked, and her father said, "I'll shoot you if they as much as touch you." She said, "If you want to shoot someone, shoot yourself." Twice a river. After studying our faces for months, my son knows to beam is the thing to do. He'll spend years deciphering love, the injustice or the illusion of it. Having been brought into this world, volition is an afterthought. What will I tell him about land and language and burial places my father doesn't speak of? Perhaps my mother knows. In the movie, the dispossessed cannot return, even when they're dead. The journalist felt rebuke for not having thought it mattered, or for having thought it mattered too much. Will I tell my son all nations arise after mass murder? That I don't know any national anthem by heart, can't sing "Take Me Out to the Ball Game." I should turn to flowers and clouds instead, though this has already been said well. It is night when he gazes into his mother's eyes at bath time. Qais and Layla, she announces after a long day's work. He giggles with his shoulders, not knowing he's installing a web in his amygdala, or whichever places science thinks love dwells. Even love is a place? Oh, son, love no country and hate none, and remember crimes sometimes immortalize their victims, other times the victimizer. Remember how you used to gaze at the trampoline leaves on their branches? Don't believe the sound of the sea in a seashell. Believe the sea, the endless trope, and don't say much about another's language. Learn to love it while observing silence for the dead and the living in it. So I'll finish with reading brief poems from this short book called Text to that I had written as an experiment and also a statement on the sort of the age we live in, where we are unable to communicate with each other without a phone in hand, you know, or a laptop or what have you. And I chose the SMS has been designed by the gods of capital and science as 160 characters long. So for many of you who have limited phone plans or analog phones or what have you, if you write a message to your friend at 161, you're paying for 2 messages. So I thought that was interesting, and I decided to have if you don't know, I'm sure you know if you have to pay for it. And so I decided to write these poems at 160 characters each, which essentially, if you think about it, as Arvind and I were talking, is simply the art form of the short poem, which is ancient, is nothing new. So it is an illusion of innovation, I suppose. So I'll try to read these short poems. The Chosen. There's no ram inside me to offer to a place. Every morning is imaginary, and every people is invented. A woman kissed is not a woman in a kiss, kissing. Revenge is not what you're after. You're after what you cannot name but names you. Revenge is after you. After you, words be my body. Lick my ears against revenge. Anonymous. People are a vast deep sea. Oh, to be away from them is a ship. And dearly beloved, when I think of thee, I shudder like a wet sparrow. Graves don't thirst. And this one is called Rubaiyat Fitzgerald. As everybody knows, Rubaiyat al-Khayyam. If any of you have read Rubaiyat, the introduction that Fitzgerald wrote, it's quite an interesting Orientalist form. So this is a poem for Fitzgerald. Rubaiyat Fitzgerald. Do you know why I like Persians? An older veteran I was caring for in the emergency room asked me. Why? I asked. Because they are not Arabs. "33. And this is a translation from classical Arabic poetry. If not by the sword, then by other means. Means are many, and death is one. Those whom you love are gone, and like a sword, you remain alone, a light or its skeleton. And I'll end on a happier note, I think, I'm not sure. In love, patience is in need of patience, a stroke of the imagination unspeakable, a vanishing joy, banished to joy, not insomnia, not sleep, and knowing when you die. I'll end actually with another one. Traveling light. Distance dissolves as distance, place as place. In you, I'm near and far, and I in me is what you are. But near myself, I'm not myself, so just how far?
Distinguished poets and distinguished moderator, ladies and gentlemen. I write in Bangla, my own language. One of the very famous poet of 20th century, Rasul Gamzatov, he is from Dagestan. He said that, in fact, he writes for his own people, just to share his feelings and hopes and aspirations with his own countrymen. So the poets who write their own language, they also do so. But you can understand, dear audience, since I write in Bangla, so in translation, something will be lost. And that's why I will try to read out my poems in Bangla and English both. Thank you. My first poem, Victory Day. You know, the 16th December 1971 is the Victory Day of Bangladesh. And that day, the occupation forces, they signed the instrument of surrender. And this is the poem, in fact, this is the reflection of that day. And I would read out it in Bangla and then in English translation. বিজয় দিবস আত্মসমর্পণের আগে যে কলমে নিঃশেষিত কালি, তার নাম চূড়ান্ত পরাজয়। এই দৃশ্য সাধারণ নয়, কেননা এই দৃশ্যে স্বাধীনতাকামী মানুষের সাথে পাখিরাও জয়োল্লাস করে। কেননা যে গুলিতে লক্ষ লক্ষ প্রাণ ঝরে যায়, সেখানে রক্ত জবার রঙে লেখা হয় ঘৃণা ও উল্লাস। কেননা আমরা আজ নির্বাসন থেকে ফিরে আসা গগনবিদারী স্লোগান, আমরাও যুদ্ধের শেষে হয়ে গেছি সার্বভৌম পাখির পালক। আমরাও রক্ত গঙ্গায় ভেসে থাকা নিজ ভূমে পরবাসী স্বজনের লাশ। আমাদের দারুণ ক্রোধে ফিরে আসছে গিন্সবার্গের শরণার্থী কবিতা। আমরা বদ্বীপের লোক, আমরা ভাত ও মাছের স্বপ্নে বেঁচে থাকি। আমরা মুজিবের লোক, আমাদের বারুদ গন্ধ মিশে আছে পতাকার রঙে, ত্যাগ ও মহিমা ভাষায়। যে যুদ্ধ ভালোবাসার, যে যুদ্ধ ভালোবাসার, সেখানে পরাজয় নেই। সেখানে বিজয়ী জাতির রক্তে প্রতিদিন ভোর আসে, প্রতিদিন সূর্যোদয়ে আত্মসমর্পণ করে হানাদার। The victory day, before this surrender, a pen exhausted of its last drop of ink signifies the final defeat. This is not an ordinary scene, you see, because with this sight, even the birds chorus with the freedom-hungry folk in their cry of triumph, because in the time of genocide, hate and celebration are written in red. Because we are the wording slogan, once again back from exile, and we are now the plumage of a sovereign bird after the war. And we are the crops of our countrymen, once exiled in their own land, bathed in blood. You see, the Ginsberg's refugee poems are now marching back in rage. We are the people of this delta. We live with the dream of a few loaves and rice and a handful of fish. We are the people of Mujib, and the flag, red and green, cordite smelled, tells the tale of glory and sacrifice. A war of love cannot be lost. Here the blood of a triumph race brings the dawn every day, and the invaders surrender with every sunrise. Translator is Tapun Shahid. He's a very young translator. This is a poem named Fady Tale. This is on, indeed, magic realism. Yes. রূপকথা। মৃতদের গাছে আমি ঝুলিয়ে এসেছি সাদা কবুতর, তোমরা শান্তি ডাকো। খসে পড়া পাতার শরীরে পালকে রোম বেঁধে দেব বলে আজ এই জাদু বাস্তবতা। যতটা নির্জন দেশ, তারও বেশি শিশু পাণ্ডুলিপি, হাত সাফাইয়ের মেঘে উড়ে যাচ্ছে অচেনা চাদরে। সেখানে মৃতের স্বপ্ন ঝুলে থাকে সুখ সারিদের ডালে। আমার ঝুলন্ত শান্তি, ওগো শান্তি, রূপকথা লিখে লিখে পার হয়ে যাচ্ছি কোলাহল। A fairy tale. On the tree of the dead I hanged a white pigeon that you call peace, and I summoned the magic realism to tie the warmth of the feathers with the body of a withered leaf, and the child manuscript overwhelmed the God-forsaken lands to fly on a strange carpet to the clouds emerge from a magician's hand. There hang the dreams of the dead from the fairy tale trees. My hanging piece, oh peace, I keep waiting these I keep writing these fairy tales to journey through the clouds of life. Distance. So I will just read the English translation. This is on deconstruction. This winter makes me humble because we shed leaves. And you sitting by the morning write a song of love on a withered leaf. Meanwhile, I learned to deceive, to turn a mere reader. The daily dust of our life carries the soul of a long dead stream from the heart of words. This is a poem on dream. In fact, it has been written long before, and when I was a student of Dhaka University, at that time I composed this poem. And you see, still I am living with this dream. অলৌকিক মানুষের গল্প। মধ্যরাতে দীর্ঘ এক দুঃস্বপ্নের পর একজন সৌম্যকান্তি বৃদ্ধ এসে দাঁড়ালেন আমার শিয়রে। তাঁর চোখে বিচ্ছুরিত বক্ষভেদী বিদ্যুৎ প্রবাহ, পরনে আজানুলম্বিত সাদা পাঞ্জাবি, ধবধবে দীর্ঘ কেশদাম দাড়ি, বাম হাতে তসবি, ডান হাতে মুসা নবীর লাঠির মতো প্রিয়বর্ণ বেতের শরীর। আমি অনুভব করলাম তার দেহ থেকে বেরিয়ে আসছে তাজা ফুলের ঘ্রাণ। বললেন, আমি তোকে এইমাত্র দুঃস্বপ্ন থেকে উঠে আসতে দেখেছি। যুদ্ধ মন্বন্তর তোকে মলিন করেনি। তুই মৃত্যুর চেয়ে বড়, তুই স্বপ্নের চেয়ে বড়। আমি তোকে বর দেব, আমার ক্ষমতা দেব। বল তোর কি প্রয়োজন? আমি বললাম, কিন্তু আপনি কে? আপনি কি আল্লাহর প্রেরিত পুরুষ? আমি প্রথমবার প্রশ্ন করলাম, আমি দ্বিতীয়বার প্রশ্ন করলাম, আমি তৃতীয়বার প্রশ্ন করলাম। তিনি বললেন, এসব এখন থাক, অন্যদিন পরিচয় হবে। আমি তোকে বর দেব, আমার ক্ষমতা দেব। বল তোর কি প্রয়োজন? তার ব্যক্তিত্বে আমি অভিভূত হয়ে পড়েছিলাম, আর প্রশ্ন করতে পারছিলাম না। ভাবতে লাগলাম, কি প্রয়োজন আমার? বাংলাদেশ ব্যাংকের সমুদয় অর্থ, সিংহাসন, সমাজবিজ্ঞানে প্রথম স্থান, 1 লক্ষ অমর কবিতা, নিটোল শাস্ত্রপ্রেম, কাঙ্ক্ষিত প্রিয়ার শরীর। আমি বললাম, আমাকে একটু ভাবতে সময় দিন। অনেকক্ষণ পর আমি বললাম, অর্থ নয়, সম্পদ নয়, রাষ্ট্র ক্ষমতা নয়, হে ক্ষমতাবান মহাপুরুষ, আমাকে কবিতা দিন, লক্ষ লক্ষ অমর কবিতা। আমাকে কবিতা দিন, লক্ষ লক্ষ অমর কবিতা। রবীন্দ্রনাথের মতো স্থিতধী, নজরুলের মতো বেগবান, নেরুদার মতো সচেতন এবং কঠোর। আমি দেখলাম তার ব্যক্তিত্বের চেয়ে তিনি আরও বেশি গম্ভীর হয়ে গেলেন। বারুদি আওড়ালেন, রবীন্দ্রনাথের মতো স্থিতধী, নজরুলের মতো বেগবান, নেরুদার মতো সচেতন এবং কঠোর। তারপর বিদায়ের পূর্বে মাত্র একটি শব্দ উচ্চারণ করলেন, বোকা। The story of a supernatural guy. At midnight, after a prolonged nightmare, a good-looking old man came and stood by my head. His eyes shone like lightning that pierced the heart. He wore his gray hair long and a white Punjabi reaching below his knees. His left hand held a string of beads. In his right hand, he had, like Prophet Musa, a lovely cane stick. I could feel the fragrance emitting from his body like fresh flowers. He said, I have seen you come out of a nightmare just now. War and famine did not touch you. You are greater than death, lovelier than a dream. I would grant you a boon. I would give you my power. Tell me what you need. I said, but who you are? Are you a messenger from God? He kept silent. I asked him once again. For a third time, I asked him the same question. He said, let's forget all this now. We will get to know each other some other day. Now I will give you a boon. I will give you my powers. Tell me what you need. I was overwhelmed by his personality, refrained from asking questions. I thought, what do I need? All treasures in the central bank, a crown, first class in sociology, 1 million eternal poems, good health, the bare body of a blooming young love. I said, please give me some time to think it over. After a long while, I said, O most powerful great man, money, wealth, political power, none of these. O great man, give me poetry, 1 million eternal poems, profound like those of Rabindranath, torrential like those of Nazrul, and conscious like those of Neruda. I noticed his usual sobriety gave way to a profound shade. He murmured once and twice, profound like Rabindranath, torrential like Nazrul. Then before leaving, he uttered just one word, full. My last poem, in fact, that is on my birthday. But I don't have English translation. I'm sorry that I'll read out in Bangla. Because I think most of this audience, they will understand it. But I'm sorry for the distinguished poets, because I don't have any translation. In fact, I'm a twin. And my twin brother died the day I was born. So, you know, it is a, sort of sadness and loneliness, and also you see the birthday celebration, everything is mingled here. So the name of the poem is Jonmo Dine. ভোরবেলাকার শালিক শোনো, শোনো শিশির পতন মুখী পাতা, আজ যে আমার জন্মদিন, আজ যে আমায় খুলতে হবে লেখার নতুন খাতা। তোমার আবার জন্ম কিসের? সেই যে এলে ঘাস ফড়িংয়ের ডানায় চড়ে, আম পাতা জাম বাঁশ পাতাদের চুমু খেয়ে, রামধনুকের মুকুট পরে, গ্রাম পেরিয়ে মাঠ পেরিয়ে তেপান্তরের পথ পেরিয়ে, সেই থেকে তো চিরকালের জানা, লোকে তোমায় কবি বলে, তরুণ কবি, না না তরুণ বলতে মানা। রৌদ্রদিন পাখ পাখালি শিশির ভাজা মুক্ত দিন, আজ আমাকে যে নামেই ডাকো, ভোরের পাতা শীতের হাওয়া, আজ যে আমার জন্মদিন, সবাই মিলে আমার পাশেই থাকো। ওরা বলল, আমরা তো আর মানুষ নই যে তোমায় ছেড়ে যাব, মানুষ বলে তুমিও দেখি বন্ধু তাকে অন্যরকম ভাবো। আমরা তোমার পাশেই আছি, আজ মাটিতে লেখো, রোদের পাশে দাঁড়িয়ে থেকে শিশির মনে রেখো। আমরা তোমার পথের স্বজন, আমরা তোমার ভাই, বোন বলেও ডাকতে পারো, শরীরই ভেদ নাই। কিন্তু তোমার জন্ম হলো কবে? কোথায় ছিলে, কোন দেশেতে, কোথায় এলে তবে? কে দিয়েছে জন্ম আজান, কে কেটেছে নাড়ি, কোনটা কুলের বসত ভিটে, কোনটা মায়ের বাড়ি? কে বলেছে চোখ মেলতে, কে ডেকেছে খোকা, মায়ের মুখ চিরকালের পলাশ থোকা থোকা। দুজন ছিলাম দুভাই মিলে, একই মায়ের পেটে, এক পৃথিবী লিখতে এলাম আধারে জল ঘেঁটে। আমরা ছিলাম ভ্রূণের কবি, ছিলাম ছন্দ শিশু, অপূর্ণ হাত পাও নখে ভাবি কালের যিশু। ভাই বাঁচেনি মাঘের শীতে, তার কলমটা আমি, ভাই বাঁচেনি মাঘের শীতে, তার কলমটা আমি, আমায় দিয়ে লিখিয়ে নেয় নিঠুর অন্তর জামি। হঠাৎ দেখি প্রজাপতি উড়ে বসলো পাশে, শালিক শ্যামা লাল মুনিয়া দোয়েল দুর্বা ঘাসে। বৃষ্টি এলো ডানায় আঁকা আকাশি রং শাড়ি, বলল আমি ক্ষণিক এলাম, ফিরবো তাড়াতাড়ি। আচম্বিতে হাওয়ার পিঠে অনেক সাদা ফুল, উড়িয়ে দিল পরাগ রেণু, ছুটল দুল দুল। বলল ধুলি ঝরা পাতা, আমরা তোমার ভাই, ভাতৃকলম জোরসে তোমার চালিয়ে যাওয়া চাই। ভাতৃকলম জোরসে তোমার চালিয়ে যাওয়া চাই। শিশির এলো রৌদ্র মাথায়, ঝলমলে এক দিন, বলল সবে আজ আমাদের সবার জন্মদিন, আজ আমাদের সবার জন্মদিন, বলুন সবে আজ আমাদের সবার জন্মদিন, সবার জন্মদিন। ধন্যবাদ সবাইকে। থ্যাংক ইউ।
Thank you. We agree that that was lovely. We have about 10 minutes. Would you like to hear more poetry, or would you like to have a conversation with the poets? Would you like to hear more poems, or would you like some questions? Poems, my vote. Poems.
Collective death. Evening didn't come without its darkness. We slept roofless, but with cover, and no survivor came in the night to tell us of the death of others. The roads kept whistling, and the place was packed with the murdered who came from the neighboring quarter, whose screams escaped toward us. We saw and heard the dead walk on air, tied by the thread of their shock, their rustle pulling our bodies off our glowing straw mats. A glistening blade kept falling over the roads. The women gave birth only to those who passed, and the women will not give birth.
موت جماعي. لم يأتي المساء بغير عتمته، فنمنا لا سقوف ولا عراء، ولم يجئ في الليل ناج كي يخبرنا بموت الآخرين، وظلت الطرقات تصفر والمكان يعج بالقتلى الذين أتوا من الحي الملاصق. كانت الصرخات تفلت نحونا، فنرى ونسمع كيف يمشي الميتون على الهواء مقيدين بخيط دهشتهم، يشد حفيفهم أجسادنا من قشها الوضاء. نصل لامع يهوي على الطرقات. لن تلد النساء سوى الذين مضوا، ولن تلد النساء.
And the last one is called Just a Song. Thanks, because the river flows and the villages are fruits on the roads, and the roads are sleepwalking doors, and sleep is the shadow of death. Its white lands first, and the dead are with me, strolling in front of my house, unarmed and peaceful. They posed for photos, then left singly, without an evening or a calamity. To the evening.
أغنية فقط. شكرا لأن النهر يجري والقرى ثمر على الطرقات، والطرقات أبواب مشت في نومها، والنوم ظل الموت أول أرضه البيضاء، والموتى معي يتنزهون أمام بيتي عزلا ومسالمين، تصوروا ومضوا فرادى لا مساء لهم، وشكرا للمساء. Thank you.